Hello, welcome to Diminishing Returns. This week we've set ourselves a real challenge as we try and pitch sequels to some of the most ridiculous films ever made. Crank and Crank 2. They're Jason Statham vehicles, really, but what's important about them is the random, bizarre nature in which their plot develops, their characters. If you haven't seen them, you really should. It's well worth a watch because they really have to be seen to be believed. If you haven't seen them yet and you've got to listen to this episode anyway, this might not make a lot of sense, but that might be in keeping with the films themselves. So give it a try and let us know how it goes. And don't forget, we are always happy to hear your comments. Best way to do that is through our Facebook. That's facebook.com/Diminishing Returns podcast. We get a lot of good discussion on there about the films we talk about. So do come in and join the conversation. Everything else you need to know about the show can be accessed at dimreturns.com. That's our central website. You can get everything there. Please do go and have a visit after you've listened to the show. This week's episode contains spoilers for Crank, Crank 2 High Voltage, Goldfinger, North by Northwest, Wizard of Oz, and the Teletubbies. Enjoy! Hello, we're here again. This week we're going to be looking at Crank and its sequel, Crank High Voltage. I am Alan and I am here with Saul.
Hello.
And Calvin.
Hello.
Calvin Statham. It's going to be really high energy this week. Everything's going to be like
opinions.
So first of all, why are we doing these films? It was my choice.
I did egg you on, though.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of Crank and Crank 2 as sort of a new movement of surrealist cinema that I think is going to really take off. It hasn't quite caught on yet, but yeah, Crank and Crank 2, made by a directing team called Neveldine and Taylor, really quite unique in many ways, if two things can be unique, if that makes any sense. But very unusual from a filmmaking point of view, and I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. In many ways, a kind of avant-garde cinema, but within a mainstream entertainment format. Are you going with me on that one, or is it just a load of flashy nonsense?
I see where you're coming from with regards to the second film. I'm not sure if I'd agree.
Well, no, I think, see, the first one...
Can we make a very conscious decision to, compartmentalise our discussion into two distinct halves on these? Because I do think the second one ramps things up to a degree that I really need to talk about it as a separate entity. Yeah.
Yes.
See, with me, with me, there's little to no difference between the two of them. Apart from two scenes in the second one, you could have shown me a scene from either, and I wouldn't have known.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, having watched these again just the other day, I prefer the first one.
Huh.
I think it's more, and I wouldn't have said that before I rewatched them, but I think it's more inventive. I think it's more interesting in what it does. Whereas the second one, for me, kind of goes over the line into, right, we're just doing stupid stuff to see if anyone's going to try and stop us.
I don't know. I'd argue the opposite. I'd say the first film to me feels like a couple of very playful, silly, weird directors trying to see what they can get away with within what is essentially a relatively straightforward action movie. It's one that absolutely has a sense of humour and a sense of irony about what it's doing, but it operates on a level that it can pass as a legitimate film for people who aren't looking for a comedy. It walks that tightrope and kind of gets away with having its cake and eating it too. And it's the second film where I think they completely jump off the tightrope and pick a side and just go mad with it.
Well, I want to go to Calvin because I know Calvin hadn't seen these films before we came to do this. So you kind of coming at it with a bit more of a fresh mind. So what was your immediate reaction?
Well, Saul just used the phrase having their cake and eating it too. For me, it's like it went to the shop and it got all the ingredients for a cake and then it fell over on the way out and then the flour went in a drain somewhere and then like a fox ran over and grabbed the milk and ran away with it and the eggs are smashed on its face and it's just like, I thought they were both absolute boring messes. I don't think they succeed in appealing to either demographic that they're going for. I think their demographic is, to be perfectly honest, you two, which is a very small demographic. Because I don't think it is going to appeal to the kinds of people who watch the Transporter-style Jason Statham films. Because from what I understand of those films, they do take themselves relatively seriously. This doesn't take itself serious enough that someone who isn't open to experiencing a more surreal take on an action film. Not that I think that this is surreal enough to be considered that, but I don't think that audience is going to get anything out of this. And then for someone like me, who, like Alan, how you describe the films is like, I want to see those films that you've just described. I want to see these surreal action things. But for me, they just didn't go far enough. There are 2 scenes in the second one where it did, and I loved those scenes, and we'll get to those later on.
They are the best bits. I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I'm not surprised that you don't like them, Calvin. I'll say that much. What I will say, though, is the first Crank is a very popular film, and it is very popular with those sorts of people that you just said wouldn't like it. It's got,
really?
Yeah, it's got a 7 out of 10 on IMDb, which is a very respectable rating.
Out of how many votes? Like 12?
Out of 206,000.
It was a pretty big film, Calvin. Like, it was big enough that it got a
They put a sequel into production like almost immediately. You know, it went down very well.
One thing I read about it was when Jason Statham was originally sent the script, he was a bit like, I'm not sure if I can do it because I'm not sure if I can do comedy. And they said, don't, just play it completely straight and the film will be the comedy around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the first one is. I think in the second one, Jason Statham is playing it as comedy, and that makes a big difference.
Do you?
And yeah, Jason Statham is definitely playing up to it in the second one, where in the first one, he's doing it straight.
Which is why I like it more.
He's still playing it as a sincere tough guy, though. He just seems a bit more
he's almost
knowing.
playing a parody of himself.
Which is why I like
it.
The
Jason Statham character.
This probably just speaks volumes about the lack of Jason Statham films that I've experienced. Like, to me, it just comes across as Jason Statham. To me, like, these films are my barometer for what Jason Statham is as a concept.
This is the highlight of his career, really. Though.
These films, and then the countless trailers you see for, Jason Statham is XYZ. Choose a profession.
Accountant.
Yeah, Jason Statham is. In fact, we might as well get onto this now. This is a game that I've been playing with friends for a long time, but listeners at home, try it. You do a Cockney accent and you say Jason Statham is, and then you pick a profession, and it always works. It's always something that could be a film. Jason Statham is the butcher,
the florist.
Jason Statham is the plumber. He'll fix your
that's
leak.
A good one, actually.
Anyway, so
should we focus on the first one first?
Yeah.
What happens for people who might not have seen the film? Should we do a brief? There's nothing really much more to say.
There's the setup, which is, these are concept-driven films, and the concept is, or maybe not concept. These are gimmick-driven films. This guy has to come up with a load of inventive, nonsensical ways of doing something. So in the first film, the first one's really quite ingenious for just fueling its own testosterone.
It's great.
Nonsense.
It creates a small scale kind of action film because it's not big explosions and stuff like that. It's all about him. It's about him having to just keep moving because he gets poisoned by a particular drug. And in order to slow it down, he has to keep adrenaline pumping through his body because that stops it from bonding with him. And they just drop in enough science to make that work. Like, we don't need to understand how that would actually sort of physically work. It's just, he's speaking to a doctor and the doctor says, look, if you do this, it stops these receptors. And so adrenaline is what you need. It's perfect. It's just the amount of kind of pseudoscience to make it work.
It's such a great setup as well for just an action movie. Because it's just an excuse then to have him do a load of action nonsense for the sake of getting his adrenaline
literally
levels up. And
just
he's doing all of this
to get him going.
And he's doing all of this whilst hunting down the bad guy who poisoned him.
That's a great concept for an action film, and something you can do relatively small scale on a low budget. And then And then the way they make it, the way that they shoot it, is very inventive and very visual and really completely sells the concept with it and helps to create that. So it's not just a same old little action film.
I couldn't get over how cheap it looked. And I understand that this was a very low-budget film. And whereas
digital,
I think...
the second one is worse.
I was going to say, when I went back to the second one, I watched it on Blu-ray rather than DVD, and it really does look like, it hasn't held up very well. It's like 28 Days Later, which was shot digitally, and similarly just doesn't hold up at all.
They're not even like high-quality digital cameras. They're kind of little, easy shot-bought cameras, because the way they like to shoot is they basically set up 10 cameras so that they can just shoot from everything, and then they just edit it together as if you're having an epileptic fit. And so that they did much more of that in the second film. One thing I do like about that first film, which they do kind of lose in the second film, I'm just sad about, is you get a lot of projection of other things that are going on, like just in the background and things. And so, for example, Chev Chelios, who's the main character played by Statham, he's on the phone to the doctor, and he's running down a corridor, and the doctor speaking on the phone is just sort of projected on the wall. I thought that was really cool. And then there's one bit where he's in the car, and you see the person he's talking to on the phone in the side mirror, just sort of a projection of them again. And I thought that's just a cool, visually inventive way of combining these two scenes rather than like a split screen and two people on other sides of the phone.
The directors, Neville Dean and Taylor, Neville Dean / Taylor, they're credited as. They also wrote the film as well. You can't deny that they've definitely got a visual style, and I'd be curious to see more of their work.
Well, I was going to say, are you guys familiar with the rest of their output at all?
Well, I've never seen anything.
I know.
Saul and I have definitely seen one of them.
What?
Back when we lived together, I screened Ghost Rider 2 for Alan, having never seen it myself either, knowing he was a fan of the Crank
I've never
films.
seen it.
It's not a good film, but it does have a lot of these just moments of just utter insanity where you are just like, what the fuck what is this? How did this get okayed by a producer?
But the weird thing about that is that it was the second of a franchise that already had an established style, and they just thought, fuck that, let's just do whatever we want. At least with Crank, they created their own thing, and it was like they were given the thing to play with.
I know that their other film as a duo is something called Gamer, which they made in between Crank 2 and Ghost Rider, which, it's Gerard... Is it called Gerard Butler?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but
that. Where the guy controls Gerard Butler.
Like a video game, yeah. Is it any good?
I've seen that.
It wasn't...
oh, God. I can't remember anything about it.
It wasn't very well reviewed, and I still haven't got round to watching it, but...
I've definitely seen it, but I don't know if I liked it or not. I'll have to rewatch it, man.
It's not very well regarded.
I mean, they've definitely got a visual style, but the thing that really struck me about watching these films, especially in such a close proximity to the Transformers film series that we looked at recently, the Michael Bay ones, the line between Michael Bay humour and the kind of humour in these films is almost non-existent. Like, there is no difference between... No, there is no difference between... Like, I'm going to cite the second one specifically here, but there is a scene where they're in a nightclub, and so a prostitute gets shot in the tits, and it's hilarious because it's like liquid silicone is coming out of it. There's no underlying social commentary to the humour. It's not satirical. There's no other layer to the humour apart from, oh, isn't this hilarious because it's a woman vomiting? Oh, she's got a cellulite oozing out of her tits. Oh, isn't this hilarious?
Yeah, you're right. There's kind of two layers of comedy in these films, and there is one layer which is completely on par with Michael Bay. You're right. It's that sort of stuff, the kind of awkward racial stereotypes, like shouting at people in broken English. Yeah! All that sort of stuff is very Michael Bay.
I think the major difference is that these guys know full well what they're doing. Michael Bay has no idea that he's doing comedy when he's doing comedy. He thinks he's making action.
So Michael Bay has a sassy black estate agent coming in and telling Mark Wahlberg that she's going to get a...
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's what he thinks. Michael Bay that's what he thinks
knows
is comedy.
Exactly what he's doing in his defense. I do think he's trying to be funny and have some gags in his films.
Well, and these people think that a woman seeing a massive horse penis is hilarious. And
wait, what did you say?
Oh, the horse penis.
In the second one.
Horse penis. Oh, yes. Yeah, jumps over and she. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, sorry, I'm citing moments from the second one here, but yeah.
Do you see its cock? I mean, it jumps over her.
Yes!
Yeah, it's like a slow motion.
I saw it in HD. I certainly saw it.
But I think that's brilliant because you would never see that in a Michael Bay film because it's a giant horse cock, and that's the line where
they would never allow him the rating. That's the problem.
Exactly.
If they allowed him a rating,
this is kind of at least this is pushing some sort of boundary. At least
wasn't Bad Boys R-rated or something?
Yeah, it must have been.
I'm sure he's made a film where I'm sure Michael Bay is a big enough director that if he wanted to put a horse cock in his film, he could do it. If it meant that much to him, but he'd rather have robot.
Maybe even he's got some level of
testicles.
taste.
He'd put robot horse cocks in his films, but he'd never put a real one.
Oh, you're right. Oh no, he doesn't have any taste. I take that back.
Anyway, another sort of visual thing that they do a lot of, and in particularly in that first film, is a particular camera movement design that they came up with, which is basically a Steadicam thing, but on rollerblades, and so they're rollerblading around, but still able to kind of operate a camera decently. And it's a system they kind of created themselves, and so they use that a lot. And that gives really cool visuals. It makes everything very quick. It gives you the kinetic energy that the whole thing needs, and that suits the storyline that they've created. Well, I did try and find out more about these Neville Dean and Taylor guys because I assumed they were going to have a background in music videos. Because it seemed like that was insane. And then I also thought they were from a cinematography background, which I think is probably true. But they basically got no credits before this, or certainly nothing that's sort of substantial enough to have made it on IMDb, for example, or onto their Wikipedia pages, which is about as far as I got with the research.
They are credited with doing... Yeah, they've got some camera operator credits and director of photography second unit credit on a film from before Crank. So yeah, I think
they would have. That's it. I mean, you have to have done something to have got to a point where you get a meeting with a studio to say, "Hey, give us some money to make this film." So you must. They must have done something, but they haven't got like a substantial career behind them of, say, like David Fincher, for example, did so many music videos before he did Alien 3, which is his first film. And so that's how he built his reputation. And this being so visual and so kind of suited to a music video style, particularly of the era, that's what I was expecting. And it doesn't seem to be that. Okay, well, what else? What else did you guys take out of this first film?
I really liked his sidekick in both of the films, Efren Ramirez, who plays a different character in each one, brothers.
Do you know why that came about, by the way?
Oh, no,
I assume he just died in the first one and they wanted to bring him back, right? I mean, is that not...
No, not exactly. In the first one, you see him out clubbing, just in some quick scenes, like you see him boom, 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 boom. And when they were filming that, he said, "Oh, I've got an identical twin brother. Shall we get him in, and so that we'll be dancing together?" And it'll be like, "Oh, there's two of them. That's a bit weird." And you kind of lose that because it's just quick cuts. But so then in the second one, they were like, "Oh, we've kind of established that there's a twin brother here, so let's just bring him in as a different character."
That's so cool, because, I obviously they must replay the same footage in the second one that they show in the first one. In the first one, I didn't pick up on it. In the second one, when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, wow, that's some really good special effects they're doing there for this."
The point of that was that they thought it would be kind of funny that they're twins and they're kind of grinding up against each other and gay dancing together, but they're identical twins, so that would be kind of weird and funny. It's Michael Bay film.
I must say, I do think a lot of... I mean, Calvin's right. There's no underlying satire or intelligence behind most of the humour in these films. It really is just like, oh, that'd be weird, wouldn't it? that might freak the people out a bit when they're watching it. Let's do that. But I don't know. I'm all for that to a degree.
But we talked about Pink Flamingos quite a long time ago now, which is a film purely designed to shock and disgust an audience. Mm-hmm. But even in that, there was satire there. There was underlying social themes and commentary. Not in all of it, admittedly, but even...
there's a modicum of satire in these films.
Well, the thing with Pink Flamingos is just by making that, it was a middle finger to kind of mainstream society. That was the point of it. And so it is satiring normalcy in many ways, and the fact that is normalcy is what is expected and all that sort of idea. But with this, I don't think they're trying to make any point. I think they're trying to make an entertaining film,
But I do think they do work as a slight satire of the genre, if nothing else.
But is it a self-conscious satire, or is it just that someone's been allowed to go so extreme that...
Well, I don't know. Like I say, it does kind of feel like they were just doing any old shit for a laugh on set.
I did watch a little bit of the like bonus features and things in an interview with the guys, and it was clear that they were taking the piss slightly, even in being interviewed. It's difficult to judge how self-aware they are.
Yeah.
But then you can tell when they're being interviewed that they are kind of aware that there's a lot of ridiculous stuff. They pretty much say that this writing the script for the second film, they didn't want to direct it. They said, okay, well, we'll just write a script and someone else can make it. And then they wrote the script and just kept putting more and more kind of ridiculous things in to see what would happen. Sent into the studio, and they say in this interview, they're like, there just must be no way that anyone read it. They must have just thought, Crank was fine, yeah, because there's no way that the studio would have said that script is okay. And then, so as soon as they said it was okay, we're like, well, we've got to make it now.
You have to admit, Calvin, like these are fast, or certainly the second one is a fascinating relic, if nothing else. Surely
it wasn't as I don't know if it's. Maybe I've just seen more of these kind of action movies than you guys have, because it doesn't really, like, there are two bits in the second one. I don't know if I should hold back on that until we actually start talking about that one. Yeah.
Well, let's just keep focused on this first one then. Is there anything more you guys want to say? Because you've got Efren Ramirez there. He plays like a cool little sidekick that comes in for a while, but don't really do that much with him. You've got Dwight Yoakam, who plays a doctor who's always kind of separate. He's always just on the other end of the phone. You do see him, but he never comes into direct contact. And that goes.
I was very suspicious about that character for a long time. I thought he was gonna have something nefarious.
He essentially he's just exposition, isn't he? But then they make enough of a character around him so that you think something more might come of it. And I think they do quite a good job with that, of making that exposition character work.
And of course, there's Amy Smart as the love interest in both films, which is, I mean, what happened to her? Where's she gone?
Do you know what? I thought exactly the same thing, and I looked her up. And the most recent thing she's in, which I couldn't find any footage of, unfortunately, is called Avengers of Justice: Farce Wars, which appears to be a general spoof of kind of superhero films. And unfortunately, I couldn't. It's not out yet. There's no trailer or anything, but I imagine it's going to be absolutely fantastically terrible.
But she was quite a big deal for a while. I mean,
I don't know.
I mostly knew her from TV rather than film, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think she was in a lot of teen sort of films when we were teens.
Road
so I think
Trip.
That probably helps.
And she's good. She does the job well.
Oh, yeah, no.
I mean, I think she's a real talent, to be honest. I just find it odd that she hasn't been in more decent stuff. You'd think she'd pop up in all the Seth Rogen movies or something, you know? It just...
Yeah.
And of course, we haven't really talked about Jason Statham too much yet, who, of course, plays...
He makes these films, I've got to say. Like it would not,
he's brilliant.
It would not work without him.
I mean,
I'm sure you could cast someone who would pull it off in a different way, the first one at least. But like,
yeah, I think the first one more so. In the second one, his character, he sort of brings more to it. In that first one, he's just playing the Jason Statham is the actor. Like,
but that is perfect. Like, that is what you need, and it's like Leslie Nielsen in Airplane. You know, it's because at the time he was known as a serious actor, and they put him in that film and just had him play it straight as a. I think it's a very similar thing that Jason Statham's doing here. It's that kind of playing on your persona in a ludicrous kind of almost a spoof kind of movie.
Can we talk about the ending? Because I really enjoyed the ending action sequence. Actually, like, this film is all played out relatively low budget. And from what I understand from the kind of film that it was very low budget. But then the ending is this sort of a fight on a helicopter, and Jason Statham's doing a lot of his own stunts, and a lot of it is apparently shot for real, like the stuff when they're actually on the helicopter and he's actually hanging off it. And I thought it was very exciting. And then he and the villain fall out of the helicopter and are falling down to the ground, and he kills the villain, who goes like flying off somewhere, and then he's just like casually on the phone to his girlfriend's answering machine.
Yeah, he
then
knows he's going to
crashes.
die, so he's leaving one last little love note for his
I
girlfriend.
love that joke in the second.
And then
one.
in the
That's such a great callback when it's like, I mean, it's partly there for plot purposes as well, but it's so great. And in the second one, when he's like, "I didn't you get my message?" and then you just cut to the answering machine just going like you can't hear anything.
But that is very telling of that is a good example of what the whole second film is about. It's like, hey, you remember that first film we made? This is like the same, but we're taking the piss out of ourselves, kind of thing. It is self-referential. It is self-parodying in some ways.
Oh yeah,
and
this is the thing. I love self-parody when it's done legitimately, but it's so hard to find real self-parody. Most things that would kind of sell themselves as self-parody are just things like Sharknado, and it's not. That isn't self-parody. You're just making a bad film on purpose and then expecting us to laugh at it. Whereas this is, they're truly kind of folding the franchise in on itself and then making fun of what they were doing whilst doing it. And the only other film series I can think of that does it are the Evil Dead movies that I love so much. Army of Darkness is that exact same thing of self-parody.
True.
And so basically the first film ends with him plummeting to his death from a helicopter. He smashes into the ground, and that's the end of the film, except right at the very end, he opens his eyes again. And so it's like, he's still alive. And so the second film begins there, essentially, doesn't it?
Well, he's whisked away in a van, and his heart is harvested.
Well, that is right from that very first scene. He's fallen and he's landed on the ground. Like, obviously, he should be splattered and dead. So we're already in a kind of unrealistic sense of the world. But these guys come and grab him and just shovel him into a van. Literally shovel him into a van. A guy's there with a big shovel to prise him off the floor. Which is like, as an opening scene, it is just like, okay, we know where we're going with this. They're just completely taking the piss.
And when's the first little video game thing? Because the second film adopts this kind of 8-bit aesthetic that's just peppered in throughout these kind of little.
And in fact, there's a lot of video game references throughout the whole thing. Like there's Grand Theft Auto references in the first one, just purely in like costume and stuff like that. And so that's obviously a big influence, which is another interesting thing, which I don't think. This is going off on a bit of a tangent, but I don't think we've talked about this much on our podcast yet, in the sense that we now have a generation of filmmakers who have been brought up on video games rather than film.
I definitely brought this up in our Kong Skull Island discussion, but I think I might have cut it from the... Because
you've gone from, directors brought up on theatre or literature to then directors brought up on TV, and then directors brought up on classic film, and now we've got...
That's it.
And now we've got them brought up on the internet and video games, and it's creating a different aesthetic, and it's creating a different set of influences that are feeding into film. Yeah,
and you really can start to see it creeping in more and more. The big ones that strike me are, like I say, Kong Skull Island seemed like a big one for that. Edgar Wright's filmography, certainly the last two films are a big part of that, especially Scott Pilgrim, but Baby Driver certainly has some of it in there. And the Crank films, now that you mention it, are probably one of the earliest examples that I can think of where it's done in a way that isn't so obviously...
yes,
it's not like an overt, hey, we're doing video games, herp derp. It's just kind of, like you say, drawing on the influence of video games.
But I certainly think in terms of Crank High Voltage, it is very much, right, you've got a main character who has an objective and he gets power-ups by... The gimmick this time is that he has to charge himself with electricity because they've harvested his heart, because his heart is apparently a wonderful, unique thing, and they gave it
survived the poison.
Was it just the highest bidder that they gave it to? They gave it to David Carradine doing a racist yellow-faced performance.
Yes, but he'd already played because of the grasshopper thing. That's what it is. That's why they've got him in because of kung fu, which that might have been racist. But this is a reference to racism, so it's more of a.
It's fine then.
Referential.
But yeah, it is very video gamey, and he has to charge himself up now with electricity because he has this artificial heart, and he's going to try and find his other one.
And his artificial heart's battery pack that he has at the start of the film even has a little readout that shows its levels depleting as it goes along. And yeah, I mean, it's very clearly drawing on video games, like we say, even more so in the second one. I might have seen the second one first, you know.
I think you did.
Because Alan went to the cinema and came back going on about, I've just seen this amazing bit of avant-garde cinema. You've got to go see it while it's out. So I went to see it and just thought it was, like, I was crying with laughter in the cinema. Honestly, I had such a good time. I think I might have been a bit drunk going in, actually. I can't
That's
quite
probably
remember.
about the right state to go into it, though.
You'd have to be. Like, I don't understand how you can laugh at this. It's I mean, when you criticize the humor in Michael Bay Transformer films, like, I don't understand.
But there's loads of stuff. There's loads of, like... I'm not going to stick up for every last joke in this film, because it does go to some very crude, weird places, and I don't quite know how I feel about all of it. But there's stuff in it, like that joke, or... early on, they come up against, for no reason whatsoever, a porn star protest, and then there's just some guy saying, like, shouting, "Do you want me to fuck this car?" for some reason.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, is that not just like
I guess
random for random's sake, random access humor? Is it not just? Like,
I mean, maybe it is, but it's random access humor with Jason Statham, like, and a whole load of people around him, sort of half going along with it. I don't know.
I did really like. I'm just going to interject here and say that I love the bit when he's like, his chest is open, he's having this open heart surgery, and he's awake, and some guy just walks in with a cigarette and like just like taps the ash into his like open chest cavity. I thought that was very funny.
And the bit where he escapes is perhaps the most video gamey part of the entire film. It feels like a first-person shooter multiplayer game with him walking around an arena. He kills a guy, drops his gun, picks up that guy's gun, carries on walking. And then he starts whistling the film music as it's playing, which is this
I did really like the music in this one. I thought he had a little theme in it. I thought the music here was great.
Yeah, it's really good in the second film, isn't it? It's a really strong score for this kind of a film.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. Can we talk a little bit about, because it's in the early stages of the film that Jason Statham meets a Chinese hooker played by Bei Ling, I want to say her name is. I might be mispronouncing that. This is a straight-up Michael Bay racist caricature comedy character, isn't she?
Well, no, it isn't, because this is way much further than Michael Bay would ever go. That's why it's better than Michael Bay. Because Michael Bay's Chinese character would be an old Chinese man who can't drive very well, going, get out the way, get out the way. That's what Michael Bay character would have been.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, like, when I watched this film when it came out, I was 19 and I didn't think anything of it. Watching it again for this podcast, it was a bit like, oh god, I don't quite know what, can't quite defend that, and it does kind of. But I do think Alan's right in the kind of low level stuff you'd get in a Michael Bay film is arguably far more insidious than a just out and out outrageous level of nonsense on display in this film.
No, I think it's just desensitized in this film because it's more of an onslaught. It's like 80 minutes of that, whereas we don't have, like, Michael Bay films are 80 minutes of that plus 80 minutes of Transformers.
Oh god, someone should edit that 80 minutes down from a Michael Bay film. That'd be fascinating. Now, it struck me that the second one is so weirdly shot in places, because there's loads of stuff, particularly when they go into a strip club and that sort of thing. There's loads of stuff where it ventures into that almost Fast and the Furious territory that we spoke about, of just like shots of like women's asses and all these things that are meant to be sexy. But
yeah, and it's not a joke. It is just
no, but I don't
sexy
think
ladies.
I don't think it is, because the thing is, it's so unsexy in this film. It's so kind of gratuitous.
It's not sexy in the Fast and the Furious films.
And there's some really unflattering angles, like looking right up at like women's faces, so they've got like big fat chins and stuff in it. And I do think I don't quite know what they're doing, but it's it's shot in a really weird way. It's almost like a deconstruction of that stuff in the film. It's almost like it kind of says, oh, you want a load of shots of sexy women? Well, fine, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it in a way that completely removes any level of sexiness from it and prevents you from being able to enjoy it. It does, and I do think that's a very conscious decision on their part. Like, genuinely, go back and watch those scenes and just look at the shots and choice of shots. They're really unflattering, really unpleasant.
I saw it yesterday. There's literally no difference between this and the Fast and the Furious.
There is,
Transformers.
genuinely. Like I say, there's shots.
There isn't. These
there's
are
shots from down
women
below looking up at women's faces, so that anyone who takes pictures for their Instagram knows that you don't do a shot looking up at yourself. That's like the least flattering angle.
Unless it's your arse. Michael Bay loves the shot of the arse.
But there's loads of that. But it's done in a very different way, with a different set of lenses, and it's lit in a certain way, and the camera moves in, and maybe it purely is down to the fact that this film was shot on a crappy little camera, and it was just a load of people running around pointing the cameras wherever, and they weren't taking time setting up. But I don't think it is, because it's so unsexy.
Like I said, I watched a bit of the interview with Neville, Dean, and Taylor, and when they're talking about the second film, they said, we wanted to see Amy Smart strip, so we wrote in that she was stripping. And then they're like going, yeah, they should change her name to Amy Hot, because she's hot. And like, it's like not quite sure how much of this is like they're playing up to this kind of laddish idea that they're obviously parodying in sometimes. But then also they did make her a stripper so that they could film her stripping, and I'm not sure where the line is. And I think
it is.
I think that's kind of one. But then if you see that scene where she does the stripping, it doesn't feel serious. It doesn't feel like it's being
like
shot.
You say, it's not shot in a.
Yeah,
it's
I agree
not
with
shot
Saul.
how you would conventionally.
It's
shoot
kind
that
of
sort
it's
of
kind
a
of
thing.
played like it's silly stripping, but not enough to be definitely a joke.
Right, I'm going to get that scene right up now. It's on my Amazon Prime thing. I'm going to do it right now.
All right.
Right.
Just look at the choice of shots when they go in. Because there's one in particular that really struck me of just how flabby it made the person look, and it just wasn't.
Yeah, but that's what people. It felt more natural because that's what people actually look like, rather than these.
Well, that makes it different to normal Hollywood films.
Yeah, but they're still meant to be sexy. Real people are still sexy. It's like,
but whenever you see these kind of gratuitous sequences in films, they're shot like music videos, photo shoots. They're not shot to look like real people. Whereas this film kind of does just shoot them to look like real people, and that.
Right. I am at the scene. Okay. Here we go. What am I seeing? Right, Jason Statham's going in the strip club. All right, lots of people spanking bums. Yep, up the bum. Yep, that's sexy. Yep, that's she's boobs. That's not sexy. That's a bum. That one's sexy. That is sexy. Yep, I'm seeing mainly sex. Like, not terribly attractive. I mean, these people aren't supermodels or anything, but they're like, it looks like the kind of people you would actually find in a strip club.
Yeah, because this is a film that is dirty and grimy, and like a strip club is dirty and grimy, and the people there.
Yeah, but some people still find that hot.
Well, is it?
Well, not for me, but for some people, it's the kind of people that probably enjoy this. It is. I don't know. Like, there's the bit where, okay, Jason Statham hijacks a police vehicle at one point, and Amy Smart is stuck in the back with a random lady who's like trying to finger her and like all this kind of stuff, and I think we're supposed to think of that as being attractive, because why else would it be?
No, I don't think you are meant to find that sexy. I think you're meant to find that funny, and it's very lowbrow. But then Amy Smart does headbutt the woman and like knock her out.
But why is it funny? It's like,
I agree. I don't particularly.
She's trying to
like
rape
that.
her, and then Amy Smart's kind of getting into a little bit at one point, and it's like, I don't understand.
No, she doesn't. She pretends she's getting into it because she's trying to get the key off her, handcuff key.
That's something, actually. I'm sorry, just to go back to the first film, you complain about the scene in Goldfinger where Sean Connery is forcing himself and Pussy Galore in the hay. Like, in the first film here, like, she is very, very definitely saying to him, no, I do not want to have sex with you in this public place. And he forces it on her, and then she goes, all right, then fine. It's exactly the same thing.
It's different because he's not doing it for the hell of it. He's not doing it to get his rocks off. He's doing it because he's going to die.
James Bond needed to do it to persuade her to change the canisters in the planes from nerve gas to a harmless air.
But the difference is also, in terms of his actions in that scene, they are not necessarily condoned, but justified by the position he's in. What my problem with that scene is that there's a load of people around them just watching, where she's obviously, and as far as they know, she is being attacked by a complete stranger. And so the fact that no one steps in, but then they also just start watching and giggling, that is what's weird about that scene for me, rather than his behaviour.
I was much more okay with it in the second film, where she is very much up for it, and she's like, it's at the race course and all that. I thought that was quite funny.
And then and then as she's having a moment of orgasm, she sees a giant horsecock. I mean, that is comedy classic. What more do you want?
Well, maybe if there was a point to it, like, what's the point? There's no joke to it. It's just she sees a giant horse penis, and is she?
It's a classic visual metaphor. You know, when in your classic old-fashioned films where you'd see someone making love, and then it'd like cut to a shot of a rocket going off or a train going through a tunnel. It's like the equivalent of that, but it's just like but that's the filmmakers going, do you know what? It's a big horsecock. So that's the metaphor you're dealing with.
But it's not a metaphor. It's just a horse penis. It's not like at the end of North by Northwest when they're on the bed and then you see a train going in a tunnel, because that's like,
it's like a parody of that. That was
that's
there
it. Yeah, it's
like,
taking the piss out of
infer
it.
Something they couldn't like show, and this is like.
But they are showing it
exactly.
Yeah, because they're taking the piss.
I don't understand. Like, it makes no sense. I think you're justifying something that is.
Have you never been in the throes of passion and then
Thought of a horsecock?
And then you're over the threshold, and then you look up and there's like something you don't want to see.
Oh, I've had that with your face, actually.
I was about to say, maybe I knock at the door or something like that and go, Calvin, can I borrow a DVD? And you'll go, oh! Has that ever happened?
Yeah, actually, many times. We lived together for 2 years, so yeah, it definitely happened.
Anyway, look, and I'm not going to try and defend everything about this film, because I think it is very much a case of them trying to do everything they can and see what they get away with. Some of it hits, some of it doesn't. But like, for example, when Efren Ramirez's new character has something that they call full body Tourette's, which basically means he just spasms every now and then, which has that has no purpose. It's not particularly funny because they don't play it in a funny way enough, and it just seems stupid.
There's one or two gags where like he'll try and stop someone, and then he just starts doing the Tourette, or when he's on the bike with Jason Statham and like basically crashes it, doesn't he? Because he just has Tourette's, like spasming on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very weird decision on their part, but whatever.
Do either of you know why Jerry Halliwell's in this film?
Well, if you were casting a young Jason Statham's mum, who would you cast?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, actually, yeah.
Okay, good.
So, on to the two scenes.
Okay, well, the first one is, so near the end of the film, he runs into a electrical
substation.
Yeah. And then he gets into a fight with this guy that he's been chasing, who he believes has his heart. And it inexplicably just turns into a kaiju battle sequence with rubber suit versions of the characters. There's a big rubber mask, like Bo Selector or something. Rubber mask Jason Statham, rubber mask version of the other guy. And there's complete with miniature models of the onlookers that are like zoomed in on, looking at them fighting, like, you know, it's probably the weirdest thing I've ever seen in a film.
I think that moment where it becomes the kaiju thing, and that whole scene, it might be the finest piece of cinema I've ever seen.
I mean, like I say, I was in tears in the cinema when we got to that bit. I was struggling to breathe.
The justification behind it is like, yeah, he's powered by electricity, so he's getting these power-ups, and so when he hits the substation, it's like the ultimate power-up, and so he becomes a giant. It's like, in video game mentality, it kind of makes sense.
But it isn't...
if you're trying to justify it.
The idea isn't that he's actually becoming a giant. It's clearly portrayed as, we're going to do this in the style of this thing. And on the rewatch, it almost felt like you're meant to take it as like happening in his head, because he's just going a bit mental, but it doesn't really come across like that. certainly the first time I watched it, it just felt like the film was transitioning into rubber suit motion, whatever you call it. It was,
and the fact that they deliberately make it bad, like for example, the guy's got a rubber mask on and it doesn't even close at the back, and you see his hair sticking out, and like like they say, the little stick figures are literally just little stick figures. It's obviously played for laughs, but like, what were they trying to do with it? What was their intention?
Loved it though. My favourite bit of the film.
Well, go on, Carl, what did you think of it, Calvin? As someone who wasn't particularly enjoying the film up to that
Oh,
point.
I thought it was very funny. I wanted more of the film to be like that, being very silly and just I would have loved it. Unfortunately, it was spoilt for me just because I know enough about the films that I know. Oh, in the second one, there is that bit where it goes kaiju, monster, whatever. I would love to know what it was like to experience the film, and that just happened because it is so bizarre and like out of like the humour in the second one. I do like it. It does escalate. It does kind of get sillier and sillier, which I like.
I think it's why I left the cinema such a big fan of it, to be honest, was just that there's about 3 sequences at the very end that are just so completely mind-numbingly, bafflingly off the wall that I just couldn't help but like it. And that's one of them.
But no, we have the final shootout, which is my other favourite bit, is when the main villain from the first film is who we thought was dead is actually wheeled out, and he's now a head in a tank and being kept alive,
bubbling
basically
away,
just so that he can see Jason Statham die. I thought that was hilarious.
That's it. The last sequence is brilliant because like you say, he's a head in a jar. It's amazing, and then he picks up the head in the jar and drop kicks it into the pool.
Yeah, which is great.
And then
at some point towards the end, he ends up on fire, and then he kills the villains and whatever. And then you
say that like it doesn't make sense. I mean, it's completely justified narratively.
No! I'm not saying like it doesn't make sense.
He goes up to a pylon basically, and because he needs to juice himself up with the electricity, but the electric shock sets him on fire as well. And then he just carries on as normal.
he's just walking around on fire and like slightly burning, but not really.
Yes. And then he sees the Chinese hooker from earlier who appears and then starts hallucinating and thinks that she's Amy Smart, his girlfriend. So he like goes up to her and starts like kissing her, and all we see is the fantasy version of this, and then we cut to reality and she's like on fire as well, screaming and running away, which I thought was really funny.
It's so weird.
I thought that was really, really funny.
And then the final moment, if I remember, is him just lifting his middle finger up to camera and telling you to fuck off. And then the credits roll, and then there's a few bits through the credits, but
yes, where we see that he gets his heart back and is actually alive still.
His eyes open once again.
Yes.
Yeah. But this is the ultimate ending. This is like, it's literally a middle finger to the audience as well. It's like, we didn't care about what we were doing. Like, was there a story even here? We don't care. Fuck off. The film's over. Piss off. Like that.
I don't like anarchy.
The ending.
See that, and that is why the second film's the better one, if you ask me. Like, I can appreciate the first film as a more conventionally coherent, better crafted bit of work, whereas the second film is just so off the fucking wall, like just bizarre. I don't know. So the third film, they've spoken about doing it. They say they want to do it. Jason Statham every few years will say still wants to make it. I think most recently in some press for one of the Fast and the Furious films, he was saying he'd still like to do it. Do you think it'll ever happen?
No.
No.
I think too much time has passed.
Yeah. I think enough time's passed, enough people didn't get the second one. The same studio might be more inclined to actually read the script that's handed in, having seen the second film turn in. But I would love to see it. I mean, they're not expensive films. I'm sure it could happen. I mean, the other thing is, where the frigging hell can you even go from there? But I'm sure people said that about the first film. And that's probably a good segue, actually, to give our own ideas as to where they could go. Okay.
So my film is called Wafty Crank. And this is...
Sorry. Sorry, what's Wafty Crank?
wafty crank, yeah. And this best described as speed in a scrotum.
Oh, God.
So now, I'm not worried about direct continuity or anything like that. Yeah, let's not piss about. So we've got Jason Statham, right? He wakes up one day, he finds out that someone's removed his testicles and replaced them with tiny testicle-sized explosives. Now, the basic concept is, if he gets an erection, then the testicles are armed. And after that, if the erection goes down, the testicles will explode. Now, this gives a really good two-part structure. So firstly, he has to try and not get an erection. And then after inevitably he does, he has to then maintain it at all costs. All while he's chasing down the person who's done it to him.
The idea of Jason Statham doing one of his little parkour chase sequences, but he's sort of awkwardly walking along with a huge hard-on sticking out. Oh, that is an incredible idea.
And I think it's totally in keeping with the style of the film.
It is completely, yeah.
So I've got some plot points here. So at first we've got him. He's got to kind of comedically come into contact with things that would get him sexually aroused when he doesn't want it. And so, so the audience can keep track, we're going to have what I'm calling a Stiffometer appear on the screen with like a red line indicating the point of full erection, and that's like the point that he. And so it'll go up to like beep 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 beep, and then like he'll come down, like proper video game style. So I've got some example scenes. All right. So, for example, he goes to a strip bar. He's meeting a contact. The manager of the strip bar, he knows him. He's going to give him some information. So as soon as he walks in, he's surrounded by naked ladies. We can have a scene where there's like women shoving tits in his face, and he's like having to go like Zen. He's trying to imagine it's not happening, and all this will be measured on the Stiffometer, and then. So he thinks he's right. He's very clever. He thinks, right, what I need to do is get drunk, because that's he won't be able to get an erection then, right? Because he won't be able to function. So the owner, the bar manager goes like, oh yeah, great. I've got a great new cocktail actually. Try this. It's called the Diamond Cutter. And so he just immediately knocks them back. Right? He's like, boom, 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 like a few drinks, and he goes, oh, so why is it called the Diamond Cutter? And the guy goes, well, it's because it's got Viagra in it. Oh my God, he's just taken 3 hits of Viagra. Chelios runs out, he grabs the nearest motorcycle, but the vibrations of the engine between his legs is really starting to get going. So what he's doing, he's got to think of he's thinking of his mother in a bikini. I thought that would be a good cameo for Helen Mirren, actually. So he's thinking of... because the distraction of thinking of his naked mother and the drunkenness, he crashes the bike. And I thought it'd be good if he smashes into something and like he goes flying through a wall and he leaves a kind of comedically Statham-sized hole in it, and he like when Wile E. Coyote goes through a wall or something like that. Yeah. But he lands, as luck would have it, on a lovely soft bed. He sits up, he looks around, only to discover he's surrounded by naked ladies again. Oh my God, would you believe it? He's landed right in the middle of a porno set. Now, apparently completely unfazed by the fact that a man has just crashed through the wall, the filming continues. The girls are writhing around, they're rubbing each other, they've got their breasts out. Chelios, he's unable to avoid the sight of jiggling titties, so he closes his eyes and he tries to stumble his way out of the room, but that doesn't help because now he's just blindly grabbing at titties. But then all the girls are still wearing bikini bottoms, and we think this is just kind of Hollywood censorship. We can show tits, but no full frontal. But just when the Stiffometer is reaching crisis point, the director suddenly he shouts to all the girls, right, that's enough softcore material, time to take off the bottoms, get totally naked. He's panicked. He knows that's going to push him over the edge, so he closes his eyes, he goes to his safe place. He's wandering through fields. He's climbing a tree, doing fun, childish, innocent things. Oh, look, a simple farm girl milking a cow. Oh, that's a bit too sexual. Come back. Innocent things. A puppy playing in a stream. What beautiful, innocent ideas. And the Stiffometer retracts to 0. Safe, he opens his eyes again, and we're back in the porno set. He looks around, he can't believe it. Every one of those girls is now totally naked and showing off their giant erect penises. Yes, it turns out that this is an all-ladyboy porno. And immediately the Stiffometer whams up to 100%. His one weakness, chicks with dicks. He can't resist it. His testicle bombs are primed. Now, we could show this with a crash zoom into his testicles and then showing the devices inside clicking or something, like
can we see some little CGI animated Jason Statham spermatozoa?
I think that's a pretty good idea. Jason Statham is the spermatozoa.
I mean, that is exactly the sort of thing that these films would do. Jason Statham's head on us.
And it'd just be him, motion capture his face, just going, "Oh, darling, what?" And then, right now he's fully aware he has to maintain this erection. He immediately starts bending over the girls. He's giving them a good scene too, and the porno director, he's loving it, and he's like directing his camera and like, "I'll get all the action. Yeah, this is going to be great." I thought this would be quite a good role for someone to do a cameo. I don't know. Who do you think would make a good porno director cameo?
Oh God, there's so many.
Kelsey Grammer?
Yes.
Quentin Tarantino? He might.
Actually, he would do it. Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Like Crank 2 is exactly the kind of film that would turn up in Quentin Tarantino's top 10 of the year.
Yeah. Is that right?
So now, obviously, everything he does is now going to challenge his ability to stay stiff. So the important thing is he'll have to occasionally give it a bit of a manual pump to keep it going, regardless of where he is or what he's doing. So he could just be walking down a street. He has to stop to top himself up a little bit. He sticks his hand in his trousers. He's giving it a little go. He suddenly realizes this large group of sort of 40-year-old women staring angrily at him. He turns around. He's right outside of school. All these soccer mums start hitting him with their handbags. Or rolling pins, if that's funnier. So he has to run away from there. Now, by this point, he's figured out, right? He needs to find this particular guy. He's a kind of mad scientist who designed the bombs. Now, he's not the bad guy. He's not like the one who planted it. It's just his technology. So this will just be dropped in the plot, where he's finding out. So he has to find this guy. But now this guy is like quite an old man now. He lives in an old people's home. So Chelios has to go to the home and find this guy while still maintaining the erection. He's not really into all women, so that's a bit of a struggle. But there is a lovely-looking young carer working there. Now, I thought we could have this played by Amy Smart, and then we could pass the whole thing off as a prequel, and this is how they met.
Oh, okay.
But that was just a way to tie it in. So now he uses his Statham-like charm to convince this woman that it's not creepy that he's playing with himself. And they talk, and she helps him. She shows him where this old guy lives, this old scientist. Now, this old scientist is going to be played by Werner Herzog. Just because I think he'll bring the right amount of insanity to it. Professor Herzog tells him, okay, look, I might be able to help, but I need to examine the testicles and work out. Although he'll be saying this in his kind of breathy German accent that he had.
I need to examine your testicles because they are primed explosive devices.
Yeah,
that's very good. That's exactly what will happen. So
brilliant.
He needs to examine the testicles, but it's taking too much time. Every time he's trying to look at it, it's like Chelios's erection is abating, and so they come up with the perfect solution. Amy Smart, she's going to take one for the team. So he starts shagging her in such a position that his balls are just sort of gently dangling down, and the professor can examine them as they're shagging, and then. Just as it looks like there might be hope and that we might get through all this, Chelios gets too excited and he shoots his goo all over Amy Smart.
Oh, and we zoom into the balls. There's CGI Statham going, "It's time," and rushing out.
Yeah.
Out of my way, you fucking sperm, to the other sperm.
Perhaps we could hear Werner Herzog saying, "Oh dear, you've ejaculated all over."
Okay, he would say, "You have reached a most unfortunate climax."
Perfect. Okay, so he reaches an unfortunate climax, and that is obviously ejaculation is the ultimate boner killer, as we all know. So the Stiffometer, it starts to tick downwards.
For you, maybe.
Yeah. Do you just maintain stiffness at all times?
You just go again, don't you? It's the second. It's the second one that kills the erection.
I come so much of the first one. Like I get like a pint and a half. So it just tires me out.
Years of smoking have rendered me infertile. Oh no, the other one. Impotent. Sorry, impotent.
Oh.
I'm not really, though, I should point out.
The Stiffometer ticks downwards. Chelios has panicked, but he hasn't got time to come up with a clever plan. His penis softens and his testicles explode. But here's the twist. Because Chev Chelios is so hard, his scrotum was strong enough to contain the blast. So all that happens is there a muffled explosion noise. His sack suddenly balloons up to about 4 times its size.
A
and
fiery
then goes back
explosion comes flying out of his urethra.
No, I think just like one little puff of smoke. Just poof, a nice little touch. So that, he's fine. He's alive. His testicles are a bit messed up, but he gets the girl at the end as well, obviously. All a happy ending. And then, as a kind of mid-credit scene, we see him accepting an award at the Adult Film Awards for Best Ladyboy Gangbang scene. So it's just a little sort of coda at the end there. And that's it. Good. That is Crank 3, Wafty Crank.
Ah, interesting.
Okay, so as someone who dislikes the films, Calvin, have you figured out a way to steer them into a direction that fits your...
That I would like, yes.
Yeah, fits your sensibilities.
I have. So we open in Baltimore, USA.
Did-it-bum, did-it-bum, did-it-did-it.
No.
Oh, it's Pierce Brosnan. And he's with Amy Smart.
No, I'm not. No. Rather, we see Babs, aka Divine, and who is a female impersonator living in a mobile home in Baltimore. Now, for those of you who haven't heard our Pink Flamingos podcast, Babs is a shit-eating drag queen from Pink Flamingos, which we briefly mentioned earlier. It's a John Waters film all about bad taste and disgusting acts, and it's basically about this drag queen and her family who strive to become the filthiest people alive. Now, Babs is at home watching the news, and there's a report about Chev Chelios, who has recovered from his injuries as seen as at the end of the second film, and the report is going over all of his exploits, like having sex in the middle of a race course and all this kind of stuff. Babs is horrified at the level of filth she sees, and decides to head to LA with an eye to challenging Chev to reclaim her title of filthiest person alive. So she's in Baltimore, which is East Coast. She's going to travel all the way over to LA on the West Coast. Now, in tandem to this, we're seeing a story develop for Chev, which is leading him across America too, because the burned Chinese whore from Crank 2 has recovered from her injuries and is seeking revenge against Chev and kidnaps his girlfriend, once again played by Amy Smart, and holds her in a secret location that Chev has tracked down to most likely being somewhere in Kansas. Now, the thing for him in this film is that he gains his life force from public shock. So the greater the shock and disgust and negative emotions from the people around him, the more powerful he becomes. So we basically have parallel road trip stories going on. Chev ends up hitching a ride with the kooky parents from the Transformers series. We're going to get in those two. And
the Whittakys.
The Witwickies, yes.
As the same characters, or just those
yeah, the same characters. We're going to cross over the universe.
Do they mention their son, who's no longer around?
No,
yes, they can do.
He's not famous anymore.
Well, anyway, it's his parents who are heading out on a long road trip to repair cracks in their marriage. So these guys are Chev's transport, while Divine ends up on Liza Minnelli's tour bus. So we're going to get Liza Minnelli in to play herself, and the two groups are travelling across the way, but they meet together in Kansas. It turns out Liza was making a pit stop there in order to pay tribute at a ceremony to her late mother's Wizard of Oz performance. Here's where we have a good 30 minutes of filth, violence, and degradation as Chev and Divine try to outdo each other in terms of filthiness. They need to have sex at some point, and I want it to be in the middle of the Judy Garland convention. We get back into the plot, as it turns out that the Chinese hooker was planning to kill Chev's girlfriend by making it look like an accident by replacing the Wicked Witch of the East dummy from an elaborate recreation of the scene from The Wizard of Oz where the house falls and kills a woman. So here's where we go surreal, and we're going to digitally insert Chev and Divine into The Wizard of Oz and have them like killing dwarves and defile the film.
And sync it up with Dark Side of the Moon.
Ah, yes, okay. And it's going to be an orgy of vomit, shit, piss, and other bodily functions, and it's going to be like, they go through all the best bits from Wizard of Oz, and they're inserted in there with Judy Garland and whatever, and all that. I haven't really figured out the ending. I think it has to end with Chev gets to talk to the wizard, or the witch, or Glinda, the good witch, about like how the ruby slippers will take him back home or whatever. And I think he has to kill someone, and then
need
use
some
their
fucking
blood.
ruby smoked kippers.
Exactly, something like that. He needs to kill people so that he can fashion ruby-looking shoes out of them, and then try and get back that way and save his girlfriend. And then him and Divine make friends, and that's the end of the film.
But who will play Divine? Jonah Hill.
John Travolta.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't want him on the set. I don't think he'd get it. It'd be a bit like a bit of a Charlton Heston in Ben-Hur sort of thing, where you just have to try and convince him that everything that he's doing is just earnest. And
I've just come up with a much more conventional Crank 3 pitch as my idea.
Well, there's no such thing as a convention.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think either of ours could probably be made, and that'd be, fine.
That's true. Do you remember, Alan? I think it was you that I was talking about this with after I'd seen the second one, and I think I just basically said, like, what in Christ's name can they do with another film if they do make another one? And I think the idea I plucked from my head at the time was that his like head isn't working, so he has to cut people's heads off and then put them on his body and change the head every 5 minutes for a new head. And I think you said something to the effect of, well, that's pretty like within the realms of what they might have
sounds quite
to do.
Reasonable, really.
I've come up with something a bit less weird than that. I had a few ideas for this, actually. Another idea I had was that he sweats too much because of some weird like treatment for his burns, so he has to keep consuming water, and there's just like water gushing out of him, and like as he runs he like leaves a snail trail of like sweat and stuff, and he has to like drink a swimming pool and stuff like that, but they're not the ideas I've gone with. The idea I've gone with is he basically has to keep himself really hot. So we see him on fire at the end of High Voltage, and he's rushed to hospital, and they do a new experimental burn treatment on him that adjusts his body to the intense heat of the flames, which means that now for the next 24 hours, he has to remain at this super hot temperature while the treatment takes effect.
That's a good concept. That is in that universe that works and makes sense. Of a kind of, how do we get this totally 100% burned like thing? Yeah, there's an experimental treatment, but here's the catch. That's actually a really good setup.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, someone stole his spleen while he was under, so he has to go and save that. And he's been arrested as well or something. So then it's just basically a series of him running around trying to keep really hot while he tracks down his spleen. So he grabs loads of heat packs at the hospital. You know, those little things that So he's like stuffing those down his trousers and stuff as he runs. He keeps knocking people out and then pulling them into the storage room, and like you know the cliche where someone will get changed into their clothes.
Yes.
He's doing that, but with everyone he passes, and he's just putting on more and more clothes, so he ends up with like 50 layers on.
I thought you were going to say like he cuts them open and crawls inside for one.
Like a tauntaun. He passes a tanning bed delivery vehicle, so of course he like smashes it open and blasts himself with the heat from the tanning bed.
And is he at this point? He's wearing so many clothes that he's like waddling around and like can't move his arms properly.
He orders McDonald's coffee and spills it all over his lap on purpose. He eats a really hot chili pepper, and then he like breathes fire because it's so hot. Even though that's not how stuff works. At one point, he goes into a gun shop and he buys a flamethrower and he shoots himself with it. He lies on the pavement in the searing hot sun at one point and just bakes himself.
Like a lizard.
Yeah. He gets a load of hair dryers blowing on him at once. I don't know. Can you guys think of anything he could do?
Can he stick his head in like a deep fat fryer? Like in
McDonald's? Yeah,
just shoves his head in the fryer.
Or he drinks the deep fat fryer's boiling contents so it like stays with him while he's running. So at the end, he tracks down the bad guy, and the bad guy is hanging out in a volcano. So he dives into the lava river and swims across to the lair. And the bad guy's launching a rocket to space to escape and live in his outer space lair. So he grabs hold of the rocket from underneath as it takes off and gets blasted with the rocket flames as they're like coming out. He climbs into the rocket, fights the bad guys, and takes control of the rocket and steers it into the sun. The sun engulfs him and he transforms into some sort of flame god, lighting up the sky, laughing like the baby in the Teletubbies.
Very good, very good.
Can we have the main villain played by Werner Herzog?
Oh yes, absolutely. Werner Herzog. I've lost it. How do you do it? This has been Diminishing Returns.
That was good.
Yeah. Come back next week and we will be talking about sharks.
Well, thank you as always for listening, and very exciting news now as a little bit of a bonus here. After Werner Herzog made an appearance in our episode there, we got in touch with him and we have secured an exclusive interview with the man himself. So please welcome on the phone Werner Herzog. Werner, it's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. Obviously, we want to get your opinions on the podcast and what we do here. So first of all, overall impressions of the show?
Very talented young people.
Oh, thank you. Well, do you think the ideas that are created on Diminishing Returns could have an influential effect on filmmakers?
As a filmmaker, sometimes things fall into your lap, which you couldn't expect, never even dream of. There's something like an inexplicable magic of cinema.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that we would all agree with. We are film lovers at heart. That's why we do this. And in many ways, we're just like you as creative artists.
I discover no kinship, no understanding.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying we're at your level, of course, but in principle, we have the same creative drive.
What counts is what you see on the screen.
All right, then, I get it, right? You're a proper filmmaker. We do come up with some nice ideas for stories, no?
I prefer to see you doing some solid thinking and come back with a coherent argument.
Well, we do come up with some decent discussions, and, we don't always agree, so that does create arguments. Anyway, let's change the subject. Look, now you've had a chance to listen to some of our material.
It's brainless.
All right. Well, at least let me ask the bloody question before you start slagging us off. Well, what I was going to say was, what did you think of your guest appearance in this week's episode?
It's not me. Somebody speaking for me as if it, and of course satires and irony and all sorts of things, and I think it's good that there can be some sort, for me at least, self-irony.
Yeah, okay, at least we found something you can actually appreciate then. Yes, of course, that was Sol doing his rather accurate impression of you.
His accent, though, remains suspicious.
Well, your accent is suspicious, Werner, that's why it's accurate. What do you think of Sol? Do you like what he brings to the show?
He grew up without the presence of a father.
Yes. I'm not sure if that's totally relevant. Yeah, but actually, yeah, it's an astute observation. You're a man who's spent his career looking at people and analysing them through film. Do you think you can measure people pretty accurately? I mean, if you look at Sol's picture there on our website, can you deduce anything from the way that he just how he presents himself?
This blank stare speaks only of a half-bored interest in food.
Yeah, you summed him up pretty well there. Okay, well, what about Calvin? Any thoughts on him?
He's very coherent sometimes and really grandiose, and at the next moment he's crumbling and he's defeated and he's melancholic and whatever. So there's a lot of facets in his personality.
Yeah, he's definitely the most emotional of the team, I think. He's actually the real mummy's boy, not Sol. Of course, then he went out into the world and met me and Sol, and now we've given him a dose of real life.
I believe the common denominator of the universe is not harmony, but chaos, hostility, and murder.
Well, I don't know. We see it more of gentle ribbing, really. With no intention of murdering him. It's, we just pick on him to make ourselves feel like big men.
He only has mockery and contempt for it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he knows it's all in good fun. Yeah, and he can dish it out too when he really wants to.
His rage is almost incandescent, artistic.
Yeah, well, he has a certain flair about him, I suppose. So, what about Alan? How did you find him?
He's fighting civilization itself.
Yes, that is all you need to say, Werner. I know I can be a touch nihilistic sometimes, but I think my cynicism and pessimism is totally justified.
It's not a question of pessimism. It's obvious that human beings are not as robust as, for example, reptiles.
Yeah. I suppose so. Have you ever heard of David Icke?
No.
Okay, never mind that. Look, before you go, Werner, obviously we want to say thank you for listening to our podcast.
And I didn't even know what a podcast was. And I said, how do I access this podcast?
Well, now you know how to listen to podcasts. Ours is hosted through SoundCloud, of course. It's also available on iTunes and YouTube. Most importantly of all, you can get it through our very own website, which is...
I don't know. And the good thing is that absolutely nobody knows.
No, Werner, that is not a good thing, and you do know because I sent you the link to dimreturns.com, where we host all our episodes and post reviews and blogs and other stuff. Now, you did say you would have a look at it. How does it seem to you?
It looks pretty good. They seem to be heading in the right direction.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're pretty happy with the way things are going, yeah.
So they're well off, and we should envy them.
No, not at all. No, we don't make any money from this. In fact, it costs us a lot to maintain everything. Not to mention the time we have to put into it to keep it up. But we're not in it for the money, Werner. I mean, we'd like to be, but no one will give us any.
I think you should not keep it. You should destroy it. I think that's what you should do, because it will be the white elephant in your room all your life.
No. We enjoy it. And maybe one day we can make it big enough to start annoying people with adverts for Audible. Anyway, Werner Herzog, thank you very much for joining us here on the Diminishing Returns podcast. And I'm sure one day we'll do an episode looking at your filmography. But until then, if I give your website a little plug, would you allow us to call ourselves the first film podcast officially endorsed by Werner Herzog?
There is absolutely no problem with that.
Sweet. Right, Werner Herzog, thank you very much. And listeners, do head over to wernerherzog.com to keep up with all the latest information about Werner and his films. And from us, goodbye. More fun and frolics next week.